It's been a fiery start to today's historic criminal trial of a former president. Court just wrapped with Donald Trump facing those felony charges of making hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels, as well as allegations that he violated a gag order. The jury now hearing testimony from former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, who prosecutors say was the eyes and ears of the Trump campaign and taking part in a scheme to buy and bury all those unflattering stories about his good friend Donald Trump. Pecker's testimony follows the combative hearing about the gag order, with Judge Juan Merchan repeatedly admonishing Trump's attorneys, saying they weren't answering questions and that a lack of evidence is causing them to lose credibility with the court. Prosecutors are asking the judge to hold Trump in contempt, now upping the claims that he violated the gag order 11 times. Let's bring in our executive editorial producer, John Santucci, also our legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer. All right, so John, Pecker testified about this meeting with Trump and Michael Cohen back in 2015, telling them that he would make arrangements to kill any unflattering news stories about Trump, including that false story from a Trump Tower doorman who said Trump fathered an illegitimate child with a maid. Remember when that story all came out? Let's talk about how important this is to the case, if at all.
Well, it's important because what it's doing right now, Kira, is prosecutors are trying to build out this case to say, listen, we've indicted Donald Trump for this incident and situation regarding Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. However, what they're building out right now, this was not a one-time thing. That Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, and David Pecker did this at least 3 times during the 2016 presidential campaign, once with a doorman and 2 times with women who said they had extramarital affairs with Donald Trump, that being Karen McDougal, a former Playboy playmate, and Stormy Daniels, the adult film star. Daniels, the only one a part of that because of the way the payment to Daniels was documented in the Trump log, the Trump payment method, saying that it was for legal services to reimburse Michael Cohen for those payments made to Daniels. Now, obviously, a big part of today that has just been striking, I mean, take all of that aside for a second, is just to hear David Pecker on the stand, Kira. As you well know, we have not heard from David Pecker until the last 2 days for the first time in nearly 10 years. And of course, it's just revealing because they talk about this scheme that was developed and how he himself said, as has been testified by others, and which is the reason Donald Trump was indicted here, is that he served David Pecker as the eyes and ears for Donald Trump and Michael Cohen. Anytime a negative story came to his attention, either directly or through sources that could hurt Donald Trump, he'd catch it, he'd kill it, he'd make it go away. And what prosecutors are showing by introducing the evidence of the story involving a former doorman at the Trump organization, along with these other women, is that this was something that happened quite routinely.
And Brian, I had a chance to talk to Michael Cohen today, asking about what he thought about what David Pecker was saying on the stand. And he said, after the Trump administration had me remanded to solitary confinement for a total of 51 days. All right, Trump is coming out to camera, so this could fold in perfectly. Let's listen to what Trump has to say. I'll come back to you, Brian.
Can't even allow articles to be put in. As an example, these are articles that were over the last day and a half. They're very good articles. They say the case is a sham and it shouldn't need to be tried. It shouldn't have been submitted. And I don't even know if you're allowed to put them in. We have a gag order, which to me is totally unconstitutional. I'm not allowed to talk, but people are allowed to talk about me. So they can talk about me. They can say whatever they want. They can lie. But I'm not allowed to say anything. I just have to sit back and look at why a conflicted judge has ordered me to have a gag order. I don't think anybody's ever seen anything like this. I'd love to talk to you people. I'd love to say everything that's on my mind, but I'm restricted because I have a gag order. And I'm not sure that anybody's ever seen anything like this before. And even having to do with articles. Somebody writes an article. If I read every one of these articles incomplete, I read some of it and I'll look at headlines, all good headlines, and the case is a sham. But I can't read the whole thing. I'd be reading, this is like reading a novel. So I put an article in, and then somebody's name is mentioned somewhere deep in the article, and I end up in violation of a gag order. I think it's a disgrace. It's totally unconstitutional. I don't believe it's never, not to this extent, ever happened before. I'm not allowed to defend myself, and yet other people are allowed to say whatever they want about me. Very, very unfair. having to do with the schools and the closings. That's Biden's fault. And by the way, this trial is all Biden. You know, this is all Biden, just in case anybody has any question. And they're keeping me in a courtroom that's freezing, by the way, in a courtroom all day long. Well, he's out campaigning. That's probably an advantage because he can't campaign. Nobody knows what he's doing. He can't put two sentences together. But he's out campaigning. He's out campaigning, and I'm here in a courtroom, sitting here, sitting up as straight as I can all day long, because you know what? It's a very unfair situation. So we're locked up in a courtroom, and this guy's out there campaigning, if you call it a campaign. Every time he opens his mouth, he gets himself into trouble. So that's the story. I have an unconstitutional gag order by a highly conflicted judge that should recuse himself. Very simple. On the schools, should have never happened. What's going on in this country now should have never happened. But of course, the Ukraine war would have never happened. The Israeli attack would have never happened. Inflation would have never happened. We have the worst president in the history of our country, and he's the one that has us in all these different lawsuits. Thank you very much.
All right, Brian Buckmeyer, Donald Trump sure is testing his trial gag order, isn't he? He's saying that it's unconstitutional. There's this gag order that's been put on him. Let's get two things straight. Clearly, when he wants to talk, he's going to talk. But we should also mention this gag order is not unconstitutional. Let's lay out the facts here, Brian.
Yeah, so I'll continue with that. In that speech, I think he did a much better job than in previous ones. I don't see a very clear violation there, but I will go through some of it. He says, can't talk about people who talk about me. Well, that's the part that Judge Merchan was saying you're losing credibility with me, because when his defense made that argument, the judge asked, okay, so what is he responding to? What are the points that you're saying he has to push back on that are now considered political speech rather than a violation of the gag order? And the defense couldn't come up with a single example of where Donald Trump was pushing back on something that someone else had said. So that's one thing. As it stands right now, he's not in violation of the gag order. That order has not been brought by the judge to say what his decision is. So that's false there. But the problem with what he just said is, well, what he just said may not be a violation of the gag order. He may have just incriminated himself once again, because if I'm his defense attorney, one of my chief arguments would be is that 5 of those, or I think 8 of those posts of the 10 are reposts of an article, and there's an argument to be made that Donald Trump himself didn't post them. Maybe someone else is handling his social media, but he just said, I put the article up there and it mentions someone's name, and that's a violation. And to me, Judge Merchan could be saying, you know what? Court's done for the day. I am now writing this decision. The judge simply needs to just turn on the TV and says, there he is. He admitted to the violation. He admitted that he knew the article had that person's name. He admitted that he's the one that put it on social media. He's admitting to the violation, and he's literally writing the judge's decision for him.
All right, now let's get back to the key witness that was on the stand, started yesterday and then today. That's David Pecker, the former head of the National Enquirer, good friend of Donald Trump, being asked about, you know, the buy and bearing of all these stories that would hurt the former president as he was getting ready to run the White House. So Michael Cohen was mentioned a lot. I started to read what Michael had texted me earlier, saying that after the Trump administration had me remanded to solitary confinement for a total of 51 days, I learned that I am much stronger than I imagined, strong enough to ensure that truth will prevail over Donald and his acolytes' incessant lying and denigration of me in the court hallways or in his untruth social platform. Regardless, no one is above the law. So depending on, well, what Pecker continues to say and what he said today, Brian, I mean, doesn't that just strengthen what Michael Cohen has said all along?
Corroboration is a big part of this case, both for the prosecution and defense, because the more that can be corroborated as to what Michael Cohen and David Pecker say through whether it be recordings that the prosecution says they have through their opening arguments or just through documentations and ledgers, the further away the defense has the ability to say that these people are liars and you shouldn't trust them. So yes, that does help. But to the defense, that any good defense attorney can flip a bad into a good. If I'm the defense attorney, I'm pointing to the fact that, look, Michael Cohen is using his blowhorn to attack his quote-unquote acolytes, his defense attorneys, and using the media to push his agenda. Isn't that the same thing that Donald Trump is doing? And I think they're going to make a big whataboutism of that, and they can maybe do some pushback. We'll see.
All right, Olivia, I see that we have you with us now. You were inside the courtroom. What stood out to you today?
Well, we heard earlier from Pecker today about the meeting where he determined with Donald Trump and Michael Cohen that they were going to buy these negative stories and bury them. And now really stunning testimony from David Pecker, Kira, to wrap today, where he walked the jury through the first time that he ever caught and killed a story for Donald Trump. It was in late 2015, and it was a doorman who worked at Trump Tower was shopping a false story that Donald Trump had fathered an illegitimate child with a maid at Trump Tower. And you can sort of see Donald Trump's face. His head is shaking as he's sitting at the defense table when Pecker first says what that allegation is. And Pecker walks through what they did with that story. He said that he immediately picked up the phone and called Michael Cohen when his team became aware that the allegations were being shopped, and that he determined that it was an important story, that it could damage the campaign, and as such, that they should buy it. And he said that Michael Cohen said that, the story was absolutely not true. Potentially a new nugget, he said that Donald Trump offered to take a DNA test to prove that it wasn't true, but Pecker said that that would not be necessary, that they were going to buy it. And I want to read this quote. Cohen responded very clearly. Pecker said, he said, "The boss will be very pleased," saying the boss meant Donald Trump. So tying Donald Trump into this effort very, very closely. And of course, here we know that that story did end up not being true. There was no illegitimate child that Donald Trump had with a maid at Trump Tower. But the really telling part of this testimony is when the prosecutor, Joshua Steinglass, asked him, "Why are you paying $30,000 to bury an untrue story?" And Pecker ultimately testifies because if the story got out to another publication, it would have been embarrassing for the campaign. And the prosecutor says so it was a way to lock it up. And Pecker said that is correct. And it was the first time that we have really heard the telling of that, instance, which is one of the three key instances that prosecutors are laying out here. Really stunning, Kira.
So, John, who could be the next stunning, interesting, controversial, nonstop watch television witness to take the stand after David Pecker?
I mean, Kira, how much time you got? There's a lot of definitely fascinating witnesses that could take the stand here. We're talking about former assistants to Donald Trump. We're talking about longtime aides like Hope Hicks. We are obviously also talking about Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels. They both will take the stand. And remember, Kira, Donald Trump and Michael Cohen have faced off just within the last couple of months. Michael Cohen took the stand, of course, as you'll recall, during the New York Attorney General's civil case earlier this year, and it was described as our team that was in court then. I was in court for some of it as well. Extremely tense between the two, because you have to remember this. And Kira, I know you know this, said you were texting with Michael Cohen earlier, but just for our viewers at home, think about the person in your life that is the most loyal, someone that would never flip on you, somebody that you told your deepest, darkest secrets to, and then they're on a stand telling all. That is what Michael Cohen has done so far to Donald Trump, and he will do on this in a case that Donald Trump has told people around him at the end of the day he just finds more than anything else embarrassing. And Michael Cohen is going to shine a huge light on the thing that Donald Trump is embarrassed the most by.
So legally, Brian, I've seen a lot of critics out there following this and the fact that this is the first of the number of cases that are out there concerning Donald Trump. And this one is so salacious and has all these interesting characters. It's the one that goes back, 6 years, that day that Michael Cohen's office was raided. And then, it's been a domino effect ever since then. But what do you think of the criticism that this case against Trump is not only a legal embarrassment, but also a historic mistake? There are some attorneys out there that are saying that. What do you think of that thought?
I'm of different minds. In some respects, I see some of their criticisms specifically as to the argument as to what is the underlying crime. And even in the opening statements, I'm trying to find that myself as well. And that being that there is this falsification of business records for the purpose of concealing another crime. I see that as an issue. However, what I would say is, as the legal community, we may be able to think of arguments, but why aren't the defense attorneys themselves making that? The other criticism I see is that of selective prosecution. But that goes to prosecutor discretion. Prosecutors can choose to bring cases they do or do not want to bring. But ultimately, when I see the criticisms and I see them, I hear them, I push back on them, I listen, I try my best to be as fair and balanced and looking at this case as possible, I always come down to the same conclusion. Put 12 people in the box and prove it. If you can't do that, then what are we arguing about? If this case is such a sham, then the jury will find that, and if not, the Court of Appeals will.